We're going to talk about disease. And there's different kinds of disease, but we're going to talk about something called an infectious disease and how not to spread it, because no one likes to be sick, right? So what do you think an infectious disease is? An infectious disease is something that can be spread from person to person, and it's caused by something that invades your body. That sounds kind of scary, doesn't it? But that's actually what happens with an infectious disease. Now, there are certain body fluids that are going to spread these kind of diseases. For instance, the liquid secretions in your nose and your mouth. The way that we can prevent spreading these kind of diseases is when you're sneezing and you're coughing, you're going to have to really have something called respiratory etiquette. Have you ever heard of that? It's a real thing. Instead of just coughing or sneezing into the room, which, by the way, have you ever seen an actuation of this where you can see a person sneeze and it shoots out like a bullet, and it can travel many miles an hour and hit the back of the room? And when I did some recent research on that, I realized that it not only goes out and goes to the back of the room, it also goes up, and it can go up even into air vents. So when you are sneezing, when you're coughing, realize this is a very powerful thing that's very negative. So you want to be using tissues, hands. There's been studies to see if actually putting your mouth into the crook of your elbow helps that. And there was a study that actually proved that it did cut down even more than just through the hands. But you've got to get your nose and your mouth into the elbow, or it does not work. But you want to make sure that when you do that, you're going to be using good hand washing techniques, right? And what is good hand washing technique? You've got to actually get it wet, and you've got to get soap on it, and you have to create friction to go through the cell walls of those bacteria or viruses, what have you, that are going to create that invading organism that causes the infectious disease. So when you're going to go and wash, really wash till there's bubbles, and then rinse it down. If nothing like that's available, then use the alcohol-based sanitizer. Same principle, put it in. Did you know that when you have alcohol, it doesn't do as much as when you actually rub it? Because then it will go in and break down the cell walls of that microorganism. So, coughing and sneezing, cover and wash, okay? Touching things is a very real way of spreading these infectious diseases. These viruses can actually live for a couple of hours at least on surfaces. So if you really belt out a good sneeze, that can actually go and live on a hard surface after you walk away. And then someone comes and touches that surface and then eats something without washing their hands. This is a very real thing. So any kind of contact with the secretions that come out of your mouth are going to help that microorganism, that invading organism, go into another person. How about food? Food is one way that an infectious disease can be transmitted. Two ways. One, if someone is improperly handling the food, where they're sick and they don't wash their hands and they're handling the food. There was a case of a lady 100 years ago called Typhoid Mary, and she worked with food. And she was a carrier. She wasn't sick with the typhus fever, but she created a huge, huge epidemic of people just by handling the food, and they would then ingest it and have that invading organism in them. Now, another example is salmonella. With food, you need to avoid contaminated food. Salmonella is something that's passed on particularly with poultry, with chicken, with eggs that are undercooked. If that salmon, not all eggs, not all chicken, but if there is a contaminated egg or a contaminated chicken and it's not cooked properly, that can be passed along. Hepatitis A is something that can be passed on. Botulism, which is a really deadly disease, and even parasitic worms. You drop the food on the floor, throw it away. You can contaminate your food in ways that you have no idea of. So eat clean and eat smart. A comment about botulism. If you ever get a can and the can is bulging, be aware that that is a real problem. The Clostridium bacteria produces a toxin. All bacteria produce toxins. But this one will produce a toxin as in a gas. And it makes a can of food actually bulge on the top. If you see that, don't open it. just throw it away because you don't want to even get close to that because it can be so deadly. And I'm going to tell you a story about when I was taking care of a lady in intensive care, and she was very ill, and it was because she had home bottled tomatoes, and this one particular bottle was contaminated. And so as she was fixing the spaghetti sauce, she touched it to her mouth and then went on cooking. And she, of course, boiled the spaghetti sauce. Now, none of the people in her family contracted that problem, contracted that disease. But it was so devastating to her that she went from the hospital to intensive care and was a very sick lady, and she did pull through. But realize these are things that you don't even want to tamper with. So if you suspect that something smells bad, looks bad, tastes bad, you don't want to have that, okay? Now, another thing that can be an infectious disease is animals. Diseases can be passed from animals to humans. An example of that is ringworm, which is a fungus, and dogs can get it, cats can get it, you pet them, and you can get it. Mosquitoes, I'm sure you're aware of lots of stories about mosquitoes spreading malaria, yellow fever, and it even goes as bad as encephalitis, which is an inflammation of the covering of your brain. And that's something that can be treated very easily with modern medicine, but it's something that is transmitted from an animal to a human. Something that we are experiencing now is problems with ticks. And ticks can pass Rocky Mountain spotted fever or Lyme disease. And if you have even a question of an infected animal or an insect bite, you really should have it looked at. Lyme disease, it has a very characteristic bullseye, like there's a little red spot and it goes yellow and then a red ring around it. If you have anything like that from a tick bite, you definitely need to get some help, okay? When you are camping, when you're hiking, it's suggested that you wear long, light-colored sleeves because then you can actually see ticks on you. And you want to be aware of what could happen. So, wash your hands, have that respiratory etiquette, stay away from others when they're sick, and protect others when you're sick by not going out into public. And be wise. Be wise about food.